Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. Today we have Dr. Anthony Metivier, and he is a memory expert. This is a really cool episode, a little bit different than what we normally do, but we're all about becoming a better human, right? And recently, I have been on this quest to improve my psychology, trying to push myself in new ways, and I think memory is one of those things. It's something I've always been interested in, and we cover a lot of different things in this podcast, from what a memory palace is and how to use it to recall superhuman amounts of information. We talk about visualization, encoding and decoding memories, and all of his tactics, techniques, and strategies for doing that. And we even dive into forms of meditation that he considers these memory techniques, and also how his nutrition has completely changed the way his memory and brain is working. All very fascinating information. So listen to this one, take notes, and I really challenge you to try some of the methods he's talking about today. So without any further ado, let's get to the podcast. All right, Anthony, I'm super pumped to have you on the Better Humanology podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jared. It's great to make your acquaintance and speak with your audience.
Yeah, I know everyone's going to get a lot out of this one. I'll kind of get into some of my background on memory training and stuff, that the reason I really want to talk to you today. But before we do that, all the guests know that we start the week off with some challenges. So if you could hook us up with a fitness challenge this week, I would really appreciate it.
Definitely Turkish get-up. I think that's something that if you don't know it, you should know it, because it's incredible. And get a hip bridge in there for sure if you're going to tackle it, because it's a beautiful challenge and it gets just about every major muscle going. And I still haven't mastered it and don't suppose I am close to it, but it's one of those practices that's just been revolutionary for me.
That's awesome. I love the Turkish get up. I think that's a great challenge for anyone. Start light, move your way up. It's a great challenge. All right, how about a mental toughness challenge?
Well, anything to do with memory is a great mental toughness challenge because of how it expands your ability to deal with multiple pieces of information at the same time. And you'll discover space in your head that you didn't think you had that has applications to other things in life. So that's a really good one.
Okay, great. And how about a book recommendation?
Oh, that's the toughest one. I often just think of the book that I'm reading at the moment. But if I had to recommend one book above all, it would be The Republic by Plato. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of those challenges and the book recommendation. Now, if you could give me and my audience a little more background on you and what you're doing now. Well, I'm originally from Canada, Vancouver. I've been all over the country, lived in the States and in Germany, and now I live in Australia. Did a PhD once upon a time that I don't use. Well, actually, I do use it, just not in an academic or scholarly setting at a university. So lacking a university, I built my own. And that's basically what I do, is a university of memory. And I teach very much the same way I would as if I had an academic job. It's just all online and primarily on my own website.
That's awesome. And what's your website?
magneticmemorymethod.com.
All right, perfect. And so tell me a little bit how you got into becoming a memory master, or, interested or passionate about memory.
Well, it was one of those dark nights of the soul where I was in graduate school proceeding towards what are called field exams when I was doing my PhD. And I hit a very, very bad spell of depression. Some years before, I'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I had this flight up into the sky that I never quite came down from. But when I eventually did come down from, I was in the deepest depression, couldn't concentrate, couldn't remember anything. And so I had the classic dilemma where I had multiple options that involved quitting school or continuing to go to these massive exams and failing them miserably because I couldn't read any of the books. And sum total, you've got about 500 things to read in total, books and articles. And or I could just go jump off a bridge or whatever. And what I did is I went for something that I could concentrate on, that I was passionate about, which was magic tricks. And I started to devise what I thought of as the emergency paycheck, which was to go out and perform magic on the streets. But yeah, it was really cold in the winter, so I had a lot of time to mess around with this while I was avoiding life. And I came across what's one of the holy grails of magic, which is called any card at any number. And it involves memorizing a whole deck if you want to do it really, really well. And I thought, this is impossible. But because it was on video and I didn't have to read anything, I sort of understood the instructions. And to cut the story to the chase, within 15 minutes of learning how to do this, I memorized a whole deck, and I instantly saw how all of that applied to the information that I needed to read from books. I just had to figure out how to get the books into my head using the same techniques. And I saw these playing cards, and then I saw these index cards, and I started to read out loud and isolate the key points on index cards, and I memorized the information the same way that I would memorize playing cards. And then after that, even though I never really broke the depression, I had so much confidence in my memory, and I went and sat in those exams and I passed them all, got the dissertation done, and went on a great adventure to Europe and just sort of never stopped the adventure. And it's a whole other longer story how I wound up teaching this stuff, because that was years later, but that's how I got into it, and it saved my life, to put it in a sentence.
That's pretty incredible. And going back to the playing cards, so you taught yourself, or were you learning someone else's method to memorize that card deck?
That's actually a really good way to ask the question, because ultimately every person who learns memory techniques will do both.
Okay.
I often teach, and it's why my site is called Magnetic Memory Method, is that there are no systems that you can ever learn from anybody else. You only learn their methods, and then you use their methods to create your own system. So no matter what anybody tells you about how to memorize cards, you must make it your own by doing it. And this is why the world memory champions, every year or every couple of years, someone breaks the records. And it's precisely because no one can do it the same. And they learn it, they make changes, and they get better and they get faster. I basically downloaded into my head some other guy's description of what he was doing, but I changed it so radically in doing it. And I've actually helped one Canadian break 2 card records with the way that I described the training. But ultimately, he's the one who did it, and he made modifications to my description of how to do it to achieve that outcome.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of different things. I've read a lot on productivity, and everyone has like their method and how it should be done, but ultimately you're kind of taking their idea and making it fit in your life. The brain is no different in tackling memory, I would assume. So early on, when I first got out of college, I kind of had some downtime in which I could really do anything. And I'm really big into self-improvement. Better Humanology podcast, really big into all of that stuff. And I read a book, I'm going to forget the author now, but it was called Mozart and the Fighter Pilot. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was a memory book. It's the only book I've read on memory, but it really helped me with some very, simple procedures and techniques. And I wanted to ask you, the magnetic memory method, if you have specific things that you could share with us that might be helpful for the guests, or kind of a process you could walk us through.
Yeah, sure. The premise that I proceed from, Jared, in your trainings, you have a very specific one barbell, one kettlebell sort of focus. And I have something similar, which is the memory palace, and really focusing on that one fundamental memory skill. Memory palace is actually not the right word for it. It's actually location-based mnemonics. And what that means is that we're tapping into our spatial memory as the base level of association, because all memory techniques have the fundamental thing in common that you're associating something that you already know really well with something that you don't know. And so the memory palace, or location-based mnemonic, is something that you know so well you don't even have to think about it, to the point that you really don't even have to reconstruct it in your head. So one of the things that's wrong with so much memory palace training is that they'll say, start at your door. Just imagine you're at your door, and then walk inside your home, and then you'll see your couch and so forth. And they'll create this journey, and it's also called the journey method sometimes. And what you're doing is you're using space to place imaginary objects along a journey that will help you recall information. So it could be a poem, for example. If you saw Brad Pitt kicking a garbage pail at the Statue of Liberty, for example, that could remind you of Peleus' son Achilles, sing O Muse. And then if the Statue of Liberty was doing something else, the vengeance deep and deadly, whence to Greece unnumbered ills arose, which is the opening of the Iliad. And you're just seeing at the door Brad Pitt kicking a pail, which is Brad Pitt played Achilles, who's the son of Peleus. Pail helps you remember. Pail, Peleus. Anyway, like it's hard to listen to someone else's mnemonics and make sense of what the hell they're talking about. And if you've seen Josh Foer's TED Talk, it's like, yeah, really great. Cookie Monster is in your house and doing whatever, right? But it's hard for some people to see that. And the whole point is that you can't see someone else's mnemonics. You got to see them yourself. But what's wrong with this picture? And it's what I've solved, and a lot of what's made my teaching successful is that they're walking into the memory palace, which will lead them into a dead end. So many people fail with this technique because they already are thinking they're going to run out of space, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things that I've done to fix that. And the first thing is that you start at the deepest interior location in a memory palace. So that's often like the master bedroom. And then you move out towards the exit so that you have more places to go, or at least the feeling that you have more places to go. So I'm talking about mapping out space in ways that are much more efficient and proficient, so that when you're doing your encoding along this journey and creating these images that help you remember things like lines of poetry, or it could be names, it could be foreign language vocabulary or phrases or mathematical formulas or whatever, you're actually doing it in a way that maximizes the efficiency of the technique. Because this technique is thousands of years old. But I never heard anybody say, hey, you know what? Start in the most logical spot that will not cause what I call memory palace claustrophobia. And do it in a way also that never causes you to question where the next stop is, or I call them magnetic stations. Because that's another thing, is people say, oh yeah, then go to the fridge, then go to the couch, and go to the washroom, and go here, there, and the other place. But that's just very confusing and leads to a lot of cognitive overwhelm. Really what you can do is you can look at a room and think, what is eternally true about this room? And usually what's eternally true about a room is that it has four corners. So forget about the bed, forget about the chair, forget about the lamp, forget about all that stuff. Just think about the things that would be true of that room no matter what happened. Even if the building was destroyed, there would have been four corners there, and those corners would be fixed, and you don't even have to think about them, because rooms have four corners typically. So now you've empowered yourself to use spatial memory with laser targeted precision that requires almost zero thought. So maybe this is a little too scientific, but this is kind of what has gotten so many people success in this technique as I teach it, because it just breaks it down to the absolute limited amount of cognitive power that's needed to run this memory technique. And it changes a lot. It changes the game for so many people, because it is cognitive overwhelming to use this technique.
Yeah, I think that this is very fascinating, and I'm going to see if I understand it just by kind of repeating my understanding of what you just said, and feel free to correct me if anything's wrong. I do this with a bunch of guests, and sometimes I can be a complete idiot, so so you're saying if I wanted to memorize something, say it was a passage, I could start my memory palace, say in my bedroom, which is kind of like a center location in my house, and then I could visualize walking or either in that room or visualize walking out of that room and out of my house. And then along that walk, if I was remembering, say it was just a four-line passage, nothing too extraordinary, there could be objects or like a corner in the wall or something that I could see that would trigger me memorizing that through some sort of mnemonic or something like that. And that going through this exercise increases your ability to memorize. And then I think my bigger question, if that's correct, would be recalling the passage. When you want to recall the passage, should you quickly visualize walking through the house and doing all that stuff? Or is it something that after you've completed it enough times, you've just kind of memorized the passage?
Well, the way I teach it is, yes, you do need to recall the information. So there's encoding. Encoding is getting it so that you can recall it. And then decoding is the practice of recalling. So your description is absolutely correct. The things that I would bring clarity to is that people think they need to see memory palaces, but that's what I've eliminated.
Right.
Because that takes too much time. No memory champion in the world will sit there and re-visualize or, bring to mind the stations in their memory palace. And how I help people to stop seeing memory palaces is I tell them to draw it first. So the whole memory palace creation process, you need to actually encode it and practice decoding it so that you never have to think about it again. So what you would do is, ideally with paper and pen or pencil, you would draw this memory palace, just squares on a paper. Mm-hmm. And then you would think, what's the first corner in this terminal station, I would call it? And then what's the next corner and the next corner? And you're trying to, I think of it as seashelling as much as possible, which is figuring out whether you're going to go counterclockwise or clockwise so that you can proceed throughout a building without crossing your own path towards an exit. And then at each stop along the way, which should be a no-brainer stop, you should have no problem thinking what comes next. That's where you're going to create these images, and those images are the encoding process. And so say you've got lines of poetry or foreign language vocabulary or the names of people you met at a party or whatever it is, you're going to then go over that journey and recall it a sufficient number of times that it gets into long-term memory. And the number of times that you need to do it, if you do it correctly, is astonishingly few. And then here's the beauty of using memory palaces in this way. We know that there's something called primacy effect and there's something called recency effect. That tells us that in most cases, we will remember best what we've encountered first in a series of information and what we've encountered last in a series of information. Anybody will know this from their experience of watching a movie. You tend to remember how it begins very well. You tend to remember how it ends very well. But the middle is just kind of like, yeah, a bunch of stuff happened, And you might remember a couple of scenes that really stand out. But there's this curve of forgetting, which is called the forgetting curve. And what a memory palace, when it's well constructed and you don't have to think about all the journey much because you've constructed it in a way that eliminates having to think about it, then what you can do is if you have 10 words, in order to make sure that you have this primacy effect and the recency effect working in your favor so you can reduce the amount of times you have to repeat the information to encode it into long-term memory, is you use what's called the spatial positioning effect. And that means instead of just going along the journey from station 1 to 10 in a linear order, you go from 1 to 10, you go from 10 to 1, you go from 5 to 1, you go from 5 to 10, and then you go from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 9, and then you go 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. That will give primacy and recency to everything. And you do that maybe 5 times the first day with 10 Spanish words, maybe 5 times the next day. Go back, add some phrases around those words so you're actually using them with what I call the big 5 of learning, which is true of almost anything, which would be to read, speak, write, listen to those words in a way that helps your memory and from memory. So you get all those 5 things. You will lower the amount of repetition to an amount that will astonish you, and it will stick in your memory for much longer than you would imagine possible. And it just works like magic.
That's really cool. And touching on that, is language one of your primary focuses, helping people learn? or shorten their length of learning another language?
It is the primary focus, and it's a focus not only because I'm a language learner myself, but it's a focus because everything is in language anyway. So this is a language-based art and science. So yes and yes, because there's nothing that isn't language that you would encode into your mind.
And if someone wanted to get started with building a memory palace, maybe memorizing something small using that, what would your recommendation to be?
Well, often they recommend your home, but I recommend anything that you're familiar with. So start with your favorite cafe, your favorite hotel room that you remember, where you work, anything that's a contained building as opposed to an outdoor space, because outdoor spaces are often too challenging at the beginning because there's so many options to choose from. But anything that has a journey already built into it that you know so well that you hardly have to think about it. You just make a couple of no-brainer choices following these principles that we've discussed, and then just take 10 words from a language you don't know. It doesn't even matter if you want to learn it or not. Now, it helps if you're passionate about it, but if you just want to play around and you just say, yeah, I always thought I'd like to learn Spanish or whatever, just start. There's other tools that I teach, such as just using other forms of order that exist in the universe. So if you were working with Spanish, for example, a lot of words in Spanish start with A, but you can go deeper because a lot of words in Spanish start with AB. And it just turns out that there's a guy named Abraham Lincoln. And so when you want to learn abajo, well, then you can see him digging in your mom's closet or whatever to help you remember the word below. And maybe a banjo isn't exactly abajo. Maybe it's tobacco. I don't know, whatever. He's doing some stuff there. And it's Abraham Lincoln. So you remember it's AB. It's got to be an AB word because it's Abraham Lincoln in this A memory palace. Then the next one is abuela, which is now on your mom's bed or something. Well, this is my memory palace for Spanish AB words, right? And now Ella Fitzgerald is there. And, it's Abraham Lincoln again and Ella Fitzgerald and abuela. And she's, and then you just go on from there. You can do this in any language. And you're just noticing naturally or pre-existing properties in the universe that are there to help you organize information. And then using these repetition strategies for practicing the recall, you're just reducing effort after effort after effort because it just tells you what comes next if you let it.
And so I haven't practiced this method, but it brings to mind when my wife and I first started dating, I was going to meet her parents, and we were in her car and we were driving out, and the route to get to her parents' house was pretty crazy. I mean, like probably 17 different turns. And this was before we were just throwing in Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever and just doing it. You kind of had to know, you had to actually know your way around. But what's funny is on the way to my parents' house, she didn't do it intentionally. She was just, I didn't grow up where she had lived or anything. And so she was like telling me a story almost at like all these different points. Like here, here's where this guy crashed his car, and she told me a little story about that and like all this stuff. And she happened to do it close to all the turns. And so, later that evening, it was dark, everything looked different. And I was like, oh man, I'll never figure out how to get back to her house. There's like all these different turns and stuff. But as I was going, I would see something and be like, oh yeah, I remember, she talked about the guy crashed his car here. And then I remember shortly after that, we took a left and like, so on and so forth. I don't know if that relates as much, but I can see how powerful it would be to have some sort of, spatial recall with something that you're trying to memorize. I think that's really awesome.
Everybody has a version of that where they can just not only think of locations, but think of things that happened at those locations. And those are all tools that the great mnemonists have used for thousands of years to help them memorize entire books. It's really, really counterintuitive for a lot of people to see how powerful their autobiographical memory is when you match it with spatial memory. But this is the beginning of power that every human being has. And the truth of the matter is that's how you're memorizing things anyway. You're just not aware of it. So if you can turn the taps on, it's just like discovering inside of yourself that you had a Mac computer when, you were playing with a Commodore 64.
Awesome. So personally, I'd like to ask, so I read a lot of books. I try to do 1 to 2 books per week, primarily. Sometimes it's just an audiobook. Sometimes I'm actually reading the book while listening to the audiobook at the same time. Do you have any recommendations or strategies for being able to recall more from a book? Because that's something I would love to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the intention of why you want to remember information from the book and what are the stakes. But what I do when I want to really remember a book is I just pick a number and I think, how many points do I want to take away from each chapter? And by giving myself that direction, then I tend to pay a different kind of attention to the book. So let's say the book has 10 chapters and I decide that I want to remember 3 points from each chapter. Then what I'll do is I'll get 30 index cards and I will limit myself to that. Of course, I'll have more than 30 index cards, but I'll count out 30 just to put some brakes on it. And I will read with the intention of finding the 3 biggest points. If something else leaps up, no problem. I'll do it. As I'm reading, I might think about what might be a good memory palace for this, because there's congruity in memory work and there's incongruity, and both are tools. So if it's a book on history, I might think of where oh yeah, the history classroom was here in the first university I went. So that might be a good place to start, encoding this. Anyway, then on the index cards, I'll either just put the information or I'll start actually writing notes on where in the memory palace it's going to be as well. So it'd be like history memory palace, station 1, and already start encoding as I make that note, or I'll just take the notes. And then later, just like I would memorize a deck of cards, just start encoding that information into the memory palace. Often what I'll do is, if it involved something like Brad Pitt kicking a pail, I'll have on the back of that card the description of that mnemonic imagery, and just as often not. But it's a technique that you can use, and I'll tell you why in a second. But you can track also the page number of the book, and then you can have a 31st card in this case, which will have the author and the date of the book and the publisher and all that bibliographical information that scholars love. And so I'll have like at a certain position on the card, usually the bottom right corner, it'll be last name and page number, wherever that information came from. And then after read the book, put the book aside, memorize those cards. And the reason why I would put that mnemonic imagery that I created on the back is because if you ever were practicing your recall of the information to encode it into long-term memory, and you were like, what the heck was happening in that corner? Instead of looking at the information itself, you could look at the back of the card and be like, oh yeah, Fred Flintstone was, smashing whatever. And then that gives your brain the opportunity to do the work. Instead of spoon feeding yourself what it was that you forgot, you're giving your brain the opportunity to do the work, and then you will grow. It's like going to the gym. You can use the machine, or you can use the barbell, and one of them is probably going to teach you more about position and posture and etc. than the other will, even if they both have the same outcome.
I think you just put that in the perfect context for me. I do appreciate that. So let me, because these terms, I think you explained them, but I just want to make sure that I get them. So encoding versus decoding. So encoding is when you are kind of, let's just go to a book example. You are writing out that information, the 3 points per chapter, and you're starting to build a memory palace around that. However you want to do that in your memory palace, that's the encoding of the information. And then I think I wasn't as clear on the decoding of the information. Can you go over that for me?
Sure.
Would that be just flipping the card over and like the Fred Flintstone? Or
decoding would be thinking back to whatever it was at that corner that your girlfriend was talking about.
Okay.
And then you're thinking, what was she saying? And then you're bringing it back from memory. There's a whole science to it and why they call it encoding and decoding. But any attempt to recall any information, whether you're using memory techniques or not, is a process of decoding.
Gotcha.
And the reason why is because it's been encoded in your brain.
Okay, perfect.
So these are not mnemonic terms or from the world of memory techniques. These are scientific terms for what your brain is doing. And so encoding is how your brain disperses information throughout your brain.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of your brain as a bunch of cities, and inside those cities are neighborhoods, and inside those neighborhoods are homes, even just a single name of a human being will be dispersed all throughout those homes in different neighborhoods and sometimes different cities. And that's the encoding part. Decoding, and this is why even after you hear a name and 2 seconds later you forget it, it's because your brain has to bring it back from having been split up all over the place. And the decoding process can take time for you to bring the pieces back together, because it's like asking Aunt Jill from Tacoma, Washington, to come over and meet Uncle Bill from Toronto somewhere in New York City. Like, it's all got to be repopulated. So these memory techniques actually help your brain through the neural networks encode that information. We don't know, I can't say this scientifically, but it appears to be that they encode in much more related places. And that's why it's faster to recall. That's why it's easier to recall. It's because they're not being encoded in so many disparate areas. The neural network so there's white matter in the brain and there's gray matter in the brain, and they're working much more efficiently together. So they might not be any closer, but the ties are chemically bound so much tighter that you get that speed of recall and accuracy. And we know we can do the numbers on the accuracy. If you use these memory techniques, your accuracy will automatically be about 85%. Whereas if you don't, it'll be lower in more like the 40 to 45% range that you'll recall anything. So
and
the more precise you get, the higher your accuracy is, up to 95, 99%.
That's crazy. And I find this stuff very important and informational. The reason, going all the way back to why I was even reading a memory book in the first place, was I was about to start pilot training in the Air Force, and a lot of my peers that were studying, trying to get their hands on information they knew was already going to be there and start memorizing that. And I was like, well, if I could just upgrade my ability to memorize, I might be more efficient once I actually start pilot training. And I feel the same way about your work. It's just so applicable in all areas of your life. It can help you become a better human. But one question I had for you, jumping back, you said it was a completely different story on how you started teaching this stuff. So tell me that story. How did you get into the business of teaching these memory methods? Well,
I had a Mercator research teaching grant in Germany. And during that period, which was very lovely, I was teaching film studies. I couldn't find another position, and I wound up back in Canada, lost one of my front teeth, and I was living on the end of my research funding and really in a bad situation. And a very wonderful entrepreneur who had a special school called Elite, which was English language intensive training. After I banged on her door 3 times, she found a position for me creating curriculum for her students, and her business was helping repair the damage that the traditional school system in Canada was doing to the students, so that they could actually hit the ground running when they hit university. And so I was writing curriculum, and I was trying to save money to get an implant because I just looked terrible with this missing tooth in the front. Mm-hmm. It wasn't from a bar fight or anything like that, but just too many root canals had to go. But one day a teacher didn't show up, and I'll never forget, she came into the office where I was writing curriculum for these students, coming up with crazy exercises for them so they would be challenged more than they were being challenged at school. And she came in and she said that the teacher wasn't going to be able to make it, and she had a hair elastic. And she said, tie up your hair and get in there and teach them this. And so in 15 minutes, I was done with this silly thing that they had to learn. It was some literary terminology thing. And so I said, what do you guys want to do now? And they said, well, you're the teacher. You teach us something. So I said, you want to know how to say the alphabet backwards? And they were like, yeah. So I got them to do that. It took about 4 minutes, and then they said, "What else could you do?" So we started memorizing cards. It was just totally off the cuff, and I had them memorizing cards very quickly, and they were totally amazed by this. And they said, "Can you write down all the things that you said?" And I said, "Sure." And so I wrote it down, and then I thought, I'll teach them how to memorize poetry. And then I thought, I'll teach them how that I use this to learn German. And I thought, I'll throw in some stuff about the cards. And I ended up writing this book for them. And this was around the time of the early days of the Kindle Gold Rush. And somebody said, "You should put that up on Kindle." And I just thought, yeah, whatever. So I figured out how to make a book cover, and I put it up there, and I totally forgot about it. And the same friend who recommended this to me, he emailed me maybe 3 weeks later, and he was like, "Have you seen your book?" And I said, "Nope." And he said, "You should go look." And I went and looked, and it was number 1 in 2 categories, number 3 in another category. And I instantly saw that if I could make that money that was coming in, then I could make millions from this. And so I just got busy and I just started getting so many emails from people. And I mean, it's just a ridiculous story because there was a typo in that cover that I had made for myself, but it was just constant improvement from there. And, I'm not really a natural business person or entrepreneur or anything like that. I'm just a guy who didn't have a job, but found a way to keep teaching no matter what. And I got my implant, and as soon as I was rolling, I went back to Europe and went with a band that I had been playing with, and went on tour and just started developing books after book after book after book. There's more than 30 of them now, and started doing video courses, and it just drew its own energy, because as crazy as all this can sound, and it can sound kind of difficult, it's actually super easy if you just dive in and do it and don't think about it too much. It's really hard for me to describe it in a way that doesn't sound difficult, but it's so simple. And the people who do it, they just have the most amazing things where they're memorizing like 1,000 words in a couple of weeks, or whatever it is they want to do. And it's more important than the outcome, because as happened to me in this dark depression, they just get this confidence, and they get an intimacy with their own mind that is really not achievable any other way. And it's just seeing what's already true about your mind anyway, and just turning on the switch so that it's humming. It's like a Tesla coil or something, just and you feel very different. And I don't want to oversell it or make it seem like a magic bullet, because it isn't. It's a martial art of the mind, basically. And it's very, very powerful. So it's been working out very good ever since. I just celebrated 5 years of doing this full time.
Well, congratulations. That's a really awesome story. I know I like anyone's journey or to hear about how they got into entrepreneurship. I think that's very cool. So let's talk. I want to ask one more question about, you've mentioned a few times memory champions. And since I'm not familiar with this space as much, what do memory champions do to have to be considered a champion? Is it like a time-based reciting information, or how does that work? Just give me a little more information. I'm curious.
Well, it's all those things. There's time-based. You can memorize for speed. You can memorize for volume. You can memorize for duration. And different competitions will do those kinds of things. I've competed myself with a guy named Dave Farrow, who holds 2 Guinness World Records for volume and duration. And wow, that was a story in and of itself. But basically, the competitions, Tony Buzan started the World Memory Championships with a partner, and that just celebrated 25 years. And to prepare for that one, you have a number of disciplines in memory. So you have numbers, you have vocabulary, you have abstract images even, which still boils down in my mind to language. You have playing cards, and you have different timed competitions inside of this, and you also have different things, like you have seeing numbers versus hearing numbers. So there's a different skill to memorizing numbers that you've seen as to numbers that have been verbally recited. So basically what they're doing is they're making it a multiple art, or it would be like a triathlon or something, where it's not just that you can run, but you can run and swim and bike and so forth. And they're testing how many applications of the fundamental skills you have, and it's normally point based in most of the competitions. So the best of the best may fail miserably on one of these fields. You could do poorly with oral numbers and just still come out cooking if you got really great points on playing cards or whatever. And in some of the competitions, you could steal points. Like, I'll never forget Dave trying to steal a point from me when I sat with him, but I actually technically didn't make a mistake, and I called him on it. He was trying to steal the point. But in any case, I'm actually surprised I had the wherewithal to call him on that. But basically, that story, very briefly, is that I was badly hungover, and I was jet lagged, and I also had only slept 2 hours, and it was the last time I drank alcohol in my life. I have psoriasis, arthritis, and my whole body was on fire, and I really didn't feel like doing this at all. And he really wanted me to compete with him at this event. He was having a competition, and so I said, "Look, if the prize money goes to charity, then I'll do it." And so we sat down, and he said, "Fine, and I'll double my because he was putting up the prize money for the competition." He said, "Fine, I'll double it if I win to my charity." Great, and his charity is awesome. And so we sat, and I was absolutely astonished by what I managed to do in that state. And it's just another testament to what these techniques can do if you learn them and use them. Because I was in a region of hell. But anyway, there's many different ways to compete, and it's really, really fascinating. But generally, they're testing either volume or speed. And in the case when I sat with Dave, we did speed and volume, and he doubled my amount of cards. But I went out on 100% accuracy, and I was really, really proud of that, and the fact that I did half of what the guy with 2 Guinness World Records for cards did. Not just because I was unpracticed, not really wanting to do it and in total pain, but just I also saw at that event kids, because one of the things that he does is he has these memory competitions, but he brings in people who've never even heard of memory techniques from high school. He trains them on that day and has them do a competition. And I saw kids who'd never even heard of memory techniques, and they were putting both of he and I to the test, and it was just amazing. And it's just so cool because you got cameras on you, people are walking around and talking, and you're just trying to memorize this information. And it's just the wildest thing. You know, you talked about challenges, mental challenges, and I mentioned memory as being one of them. Well, there's memory, and then there's competing with memory, which is another one. And it just will blow your mind about what's capable, what the mind can do. It's unbelievable.
I'm interested to know, given that you're talking about drinking alcohol and it kind of being in a bad state, have you noticed any differences, like by having different types of diets or anything with nutrition helping with your memory or fitness or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned I have psoriasis, arthritis, and as a result of that, I had to change my diet quite a bit, and I did MRT study analysis of my food sensitivities, and I found that by getting rid of wheat, rice, getting rid of all alcohol, I just came to a whole new level of mental clarity that I didn't even know was possible. So I no longer take any medication for depression at all. I don't need it because so much of my issues throughout life have come from food sensitivities, not mental illness. I don't necessarily question that old diagnosis of bipolar disorder because there still seems to be some evidence of the ups and downs, but I have flattened that curve far better than lithium ever did, far better than Lamictal ever did. And I outed myself on this on my YouTube channel, and I've had comments where people basically have accused me of being on a suicide mission for not taking my medication. But the reality is that I've never felt better in my life, and these memory techniques will work whether you're eating a poor diet or not, but man, they work even better when your mind is clear. So I would say learn about foods that help improve memory, but more importantly, learn about foods that are destroying your memory and get rid of them. Because you can eat all the good foods that support memory that you want, but that will be very little in a field of destructive foods. So walnuts are good for memory. Salmon is good for memory. Green tea is good for memory. Big deal if you're still eating a bunch of cloggy, destructive foods that are tearing your body to pieces and creating inflammation. And the last point I'll make about it, and I know this intimately and well because I suffer it, is that nothing will interfere with your memory more than pain, because all memory comes from association. In order to associate, you need to be paying attention to information. And you can't learn with or without memory techniques if you're paying attention to your pain and not to the world. So if you can, anything you can do to get rid of pain will instantly help your memory, because you'll just be much more aware of the world around you.
And one more question about kind of outside influences. A lot of people today, you know, we have busy minds, and meditation has kind of had a resurgence lately. Do you feel that you need to be in like almost a meditative state to get to your memory palace and utilize some of these techniques? Because I could see a very busy mind or not being in a calm, quiet place being very challenging, even though like you're able to do it in competition, but that's probably a different level. What's your take on that?
I think of memory art or work or whatever, the practice of memory, the art of memory. I think of it as a kind of meditation.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, what is meditation? There's so many different ways to think about it. But if you are in flow, you're focused, and you're intensively working on something and you're enjoying it, or it's helping you grow and you know that you're being challenged, then you're being challenged, but you're not being frustrated and you're getting somewhere. What else is it? What else is that but meditation, you know?
Right.
I think meditation, we need many more words to describe this sort of thing. So I've been asked many times on podcasts, like, how do I meditate? And I always say, well, I meditate with Shavasana when I wake up, and then I go and sit on the porch and I do some yoga, and then I sit and do psychic alternate nostril breathing, and then I do some journaling, and all those things are meditation. And then I go and do some memory work, and that's meditation. And then, you know, I might do some card magic practice. That's meditation. I play my bass. That's meditation. Flea from Chili Peppers, he has said in one of his interviews that, yeah, he meditates, but bass is meditation too. And it really is. You can cast a wide net with that one. But the actual practice of memory itself is meditation, and it will give you mental clarity simply by doing it. I think my only job is figuring out how to convince people with all the cheerleading tricks that I know and whatnot to get them to just give it a try. Because it's just the Yoda stuff, man. It's just do or do not. There is no try. You just get in there and you will develop all the Jedi powers that you want, but you've got to do it, and only you can. And that's what meditation also will help you discover. There's only one person who could ever do anything, and that's you. There's no other. There's just a screen. You're in it. And so you're meditating one way or the other all the time. It's just, are you aware of it?
I love that. And I agree with your sentiment there on cheerleading techniques and stuff in the fitness world. I can write an amazing program for someone, and I know for a fact, if followed, they will meet their goals. But in the end, it doesn't matter if they're not going to do it, right? And so we have to tackle the mentality on a different front. But let's get to the quick fire questions of the show. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Oh, probably when I got started again. I had to be in Beijing, and the food there just destroyed me. And so it was just getting back into it. And then I started to learn how to do weighted chin-ups. So that was probably the hardest. But now I can do it quite well.
Awesome. And in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
I'd say absolutely memory training, or anything that's a mental skill where you're juggling information. So like just doing the alphabet backwards is just a wonderful exercise that'll teach you a lot about your brain.
Awesome. All right. And if you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Definitely a kettlebell.
Great. Yeah, to get some of those Turkish get-ups done, right?
Yeah, for sure. But there's so many other things you can do.
Oh yeah. One man, one kettlebell. All right.
Yeah.
Well, so this is the question of the show, and it's 100% open-ended. What is the best advice you have for becoming a better human?
I think it's just understanding that you are the only one who can become the better human, and no one else is going to do it for you. And when you get down to that fact and you show up to the task and you're just really authentically honest about it, and honest means that you're absolutely okay to say, yeah, I might have that idea, but I'm not going to pursue it. And then you find the thing that you're going to do. A friend of mine the other day, he died, and he said, whatever you do in life, find your Mount Kilimanjaro. And he actually had found time to actually go and climb that mountain. It's really sad that he died, but he comes to mind right now because that's exactly what I'm trying to get at, is that a lot of people, they put in their minds these fantasies that they don't even really want. And they lead themselves into what's called slave's luck, which is the luck of getting things that you never really wanted, like becoming a doctor or a lawyer to make your family happy or whatever. Those are golden handcuffs. And if you can just be honest with yourself, whatever it is that you really want, knowing that what you really want now might change later, but just go after whatever it is. I know it sounds cliche, but follow your bliss and just eject all of the nonsense that isn't true. And one of the best ways you can do that is just write it down every day. Write down a picture of what it is you really want to do. And you will not be able to lie to yourself for long if you take up that daily practice. And you'll start telling the truth. And before you know it, you'll be able to do that truth. But you've got to be honest with yourself about what it is that you want. And you're the only one who can. So that's how to become a better human. Just be you.
I think that's awesome. And that's what you just said about the doctor lawyer. I call that the doctor lawyer syndrome. These high achievers, people who want to get stuff done, they automatically jump to these things that they don't even want. I call it that because it took a lot of journaling to find out when I was in pilot training, I got injured, I couldn't do that anymore, and I started to think, okay, well, I guess maybe I'll go to medical school or go to law school, and I'm like, wait, why? I don't want to do that. Like that's not what I'm passionate about, but it's definitely there. So I think that advice. I'm just echoing it for all of the listeners. I think that's amazing, and everyone should totally do that. All right, man. So what is the best place for people to learn more about you and what you're doing?
I think the best place is just my central headquarters at magneticmemorymethod.com. There is every cheerleading attempt to get you to do what it is that I recommend, either through blog posts, there's a podcast, there's all kinds of videos, there's a free course if you want to do that thing where you give your email address, and I'm sure you know what's going to happen after that. And but it's all on the up and up, and I just am as passionate in my free email course as I am, as you heard me today, about making sure that people at least dive in and give these techniques a try with the do or do not attitude behind it. So,
well, that's awesome, Anthony.
That's the place.
And everyone go check that out. I'll link to it in the show notes. If anyone wants to hit on anything we talked about, it'll all be in the show notes, including links to his site and course. And other than that, Anthony, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks so much, Jared. It was really great meeting you.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.